All right, so welcome to our noon discussion on coherence. So, where we started. And I'm gonna apologize from the outset. I'm not terrific with the individual characters' names, right? So, just full disclosure. Nonetheless, where do you want to start?
I think Mike would be a good place to
Mike.
start. The guy who, the alcoholic, I guess you should come out and say.
The actor.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. What makes you believe he's an alcoholic?
Because at some point in the middle of the film, while all of it's going on, he starts worrying if the other mics are drinking. And then when he starts drinking in his reality, his wife, who I don't remember her name, is like, oh, should I take care of him? Should I watch him? Everyone's like trying to stop him from drinking. And he's just like, oh, no.
She also expressed that because of his drinking they had to leave LA, and then it also seems like there might have been some extramarital affairs, perhaps related to drinking as well. We're not sure what led to that.
Mm-hmm. What's the difference between alcohol use disorder, alcohol abuse, and alcohol dependence?
Disorder is actually no.
Dependence is physiological. Dependence is you're depending on the substance due to use, whereas abuse is a misuse of alcohol, whereas disorder is it's now impairing your life and your functioning.
And I think disorder is also chronic.
Yeah, more pervasive.
For the most part, you're getting it. It's kind of a trick question, but it is Friday, so. Alcohol dependence and alcohol abuse are the antiquated terms. Those are the clinical terms we used prior to the latest revision of the DSM prior to 2013. And along those lines, you're right. Alcohol dependence was considered more physiologic, and therefore, in some respects, a more severe form of alcohol, in this case, any substance abuse. In 2013, the APA decided that this was too confusing, that there was really no true consensus about A versus B, so they just combined the two, and A plus B now equals C. So, whereas in the past, you needed a single criterion for alcohol abuse, 3 for alcohol dependence, combine the two, literally combining the two, coming up with a comprehensive list twice as long, and take the average 2 criteria for alcohol abuse disorder. Right? There's one small change. That is, there is something that currently exists in the definition of alcohol abuse disorder that previously did not exist in either alcohol abuse or dependence. Anybody know what that is? And then I'll ask if Mike actually demonstrates it.
Is it
Great.
the number of drinks that you need?
That's craving.
Oh,
Craving. I almost blurted that anyway. It's craving. Craving did not exist in the form of criteria, neither abuse or dependence. Had craving listed as a independent criterion. Craving is part of the definition of alcohol use disorder. Do you see Mike craving at all in this movie?
I think so. Yeah, I think when he was sitting down at the dinner table at one point in the middle of the film, starts looking at the wine bottle, and then he says, I think he pours himself a glass of wine, and he says I'm going to, go look for some more wine, so sure.
Mm-hmm.
Could be, right?
Yeah.
Could be. Then he only needs one more criterion. And given the nature of the conversation previous to this, I think the answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
So he has, that is, Mike that surely demonstrates alcohol use disorder. Now, one more teaching point I wanted to make. Actually, I'll circle back to it. Anything else going on, sticking just with this character, beyond alcohol use disorder? Oh, sorry, I just remembered. Since its true name is alcohol use disorder, now focusing on the terminology disorder, there must be clinically significant distress or impairment. And the answer is yes, because of what we hear to be his history.
Yeah.
So he does rule in.
He also has kind of a paranoid vibe, where he's convinced that the other medics are gonna just come get him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas no one else really has that same thought or worry. It seems like that's I don't know where that comes from, or if it's maybe due to the alcohol use or due to other substance use.
I think there's also an element of just like severe distrust in himself.
Mhm.
Because he's like constantly worrying about the other Mike, and everyone else is like, "Oh, the situation's so weird," and
Yeah.
he's like, "But what if I kill myself?"
Right.
So one of the ways in which, and I don't think this will come up on the shelf, but it certainly does lend to understanding human behavior, and that is what paranoia actually is. And
Yeah.
maybe our first impression should be that it is something that's adaptive and probably even phylogenetically preserved, right? So handed down from generation to generation. If you trace us back to Cro-Magnon, times, those that did not have paranoia probably left their cave and got devoured, right? So there's probably something adaptive with regard to paranoia. That said, if we had a topography, paranoia is likely embedded in our subconscious, which means the reason why we are not all overtly demonstrating paranoia right now is because of the protective nature of our cortex, right, which has developed since Cro-Magnon times. So in that way, and again, it's fairly straightforward, albeit overly simplistic, Mike's paranoia may be not necessarily the result of true paranoia, but instead loss of that protective cortical activity that otherwise would have kept it subconscious. And yes, that might be due to alcohol, right? Anything that stuns the cortex might lend to paranoia since it's embedded in our subconscious and it's just yearning for conscious expression, right? So that might be a way to actually go ahead and formulate what we're seeing here. It's part of a normal process, right? We're all paranoid. It's just that not all of us express it. And the reason why is because all of our cortices are intact. Hopefully nobody's, I know it's sushi day, nobody's having sake or any kind of alcohol in the middle of the day. It's unlike Mike, right? Any other thoughts about Mike?
I guess kind of along that same line of paranoia, he has that really poor decision-making thing in the middle of the movie where he decides to put the note on the other door to, try to dissuade, I guess, himself from getting the book from the car. What's it, Lee's? No, not Lee's. Hughes' car, yeah. So yeah, I don't know if he was paranoid about sort of that underlying situation with the extramarital affair or what exactly was going on there, but it just seemed like a very poorly reasoned out decision.
And it's interesting because for someone who was so afraid of that coming out, everyone knew.
Yeah.
except for Hugh. And so you're sitting there and you're thinking like, how counterintuitive, I guess, that he told everyone knew, but he basically just kind of sustained it by a lie, which also why did his friends trust him? I don't know. But telling them that he told them, and then when it comes out, instead of denying it, instead of being like, well, that happened in another reality, he was like, it probably happened in every reality. And so I do feel like his interpersonal skills are odd, like a little bit dysfunctional.
And what all of these observations may indicate is that if we believe he's drinking again, and he is, whether it's a slip versus a relapse, right? So an individual who, after sustained or abstinence, right, after a given number of days to weeks to months of not ingesting or using their drug of abuse, begins using again, that might just be a slip versus a full-blown relapse. What differentiates the two largely is, or are the behaviors that go along with the drug use. If they're using with a quantity or duration that results in, again, clinically significant distress or impairment, then it's much more likely to be looked at as a relapse than, quote unquote, just a slip, which is just the ingestion itself without those subsequent behaviors. The fact that he leaves a note might be indicative that he's relapsed, right? The poor judgment that goes along, and it's not unlike the poor judgment of someone who, after X number of months of sobriety, begins or takes a drink and then gets behind a wheel, right? It's poor judgment. That's a relapse versus a slip. That same person, or maybe they're a monozygotic twin, drinking the exact same substance, drinking the exact same amount without evidence of the consequent behavior. So, I don't think this will come up in an exam, slip versus relapse, but terminology that is very often discussed in academic circles and addiction medicine. And so in this case, I think we have someone who's relapsed. There are also partial versus full. versus sustained sobriety, right? So partial versus full in terms of one's sobriety has a lot to do with the number of criteria, right? If there are none, you're in full recovery. If you have one criteria, but not two, you're partial. And then sustained is 12 months or more. So just like in terminology, that may come up on an exam, so it's nice to know those qualifiers. Do we know how long he's been abstinent? I don't think the actual number was given, so we don't know if it's sustained or not. What else about?
He's been drinking for a while because his wife was saying like, this is not the same man I married, and he's been.
So he's relapsed for a while.
It seemed like at least, I don't know, she didn't specify how long,
Yeah.
but she said like, this drinking behavior is like not characteristic of him.
Yep. Now, again, there is a illness, single best answer, of alcohol-induced psychotic disorder. So we would have to investigate whether or not chicken versus the egg. The paranoia is a direct and physiologic consequence of his drinking, because if so, there might be another illness to consider here, albeit one that's taking everything into account, and that's alcohol-induced psychotic disorder. Right. And if that is the case, what else? Let's say that rules in, that we look at the script, we nerd out, read into it, and decide, yeah, that temporality does exist, and we do think this is an established diagnosis. You're a clinician. Next step? After safety, of course, safety assessment, but following a safety assessment. Generally speaking, forget Mike for a second, somebody comes in with paranoia. What are the first two things a clinician must consider?
Substance use,
And? If that's one, what's 1B?
medical condition.
Right? So let's apply it here, right? Even for a substance-induced mental disorder, such as an alcohol-induced psychotic disorder, what else do you have to consider here?
Well, like there was ketamine at the party.
We're gonna get there.
Okay.
We're gonna get there.
A medical condition.
Right. Is there a medical condition that in fact itself may be induced by alcohol that might lend to paranoia? All right.
Kind of an interesting character in the movie, and she kind of displays like classic history features. But there's also that, I was wondering what your thoughts are on. There's this interesting interplay in the beginning of the movie when she says she's a huge fan of this Roswell show, and Mike is apparently like what sounds like a mainstream actor in the show, and she has like no idea who he is. Yeah, I'm not sure what your thoughts were on that. I know she has like a lot of other stuff going on. That's probably more
So
relevant.
what is your
Yeah.
take on that?
I don't know.
So she talks about how she's a fan of the show, but then doesn't identify the actor in the show.
Well, attention seeking. She wants to bring attention to herself.
Right, if you're saying she's histrionic, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah.
Right? That is consistent with your initial thought, and that's histrionic personality. Now, when we talk about personality disorders, I mentioned this before, again, we need to bring this up again. When you study for your exam, your initial phase of studying the personality disorders should be along those clusters, right? This is a cluster B personality disorder, and because of that, it shares qualities with borderline personality, antisocial, as well as narcissistic personality disorder, right? So, and that's the way to initially begin studying these conditions. And the second phase, though, or maybe the final phase, maybe 24 to 48 hours before you're sitting for your shelf exam, is to look at these personality disorders and just throw them into a hat, and then recategorize them as those that A, adhere to a cardinal trait, and then those that column B do not. I'll already tell you that there's only really one condition that is in column B, and that's borderline personality disorder. You just can't put one sentence, 10 words or less, together to capture borderline personality. The others, you could, and histrionic is definitely one from that proverbial column A. So, given that, we know it's cluster B, and we know it's going to share signs and symptoms with the other three from cluster B. That said, what is that cardinal trait? What is that cardinal feature?
Attention seeking?
Yeah. Attention seeking, it's that drive or need to be the center of attention. Okay? Why? Now, if you the prequel of Coherence, right? which premiered, 2 years later. It's the origin story. Builds what? It doesn't exist. Builds what? This is the cool part of psychiatry. You get to write them yourself.
But Laurie has a very external locus of control.
Yeah, that's where it really starts. And that's where really all of cluster B starts, that
Mhm.
external locus of control, very poor self-esteem, right? Now, Freud would tell us this began as early as 2 years of age. Why?
Poor attachment.
Neglect,
Yeah, poor attachment.
poor attachment, right? Toilet training,
Mhm.
right? When we begin to actually have those feelings of reward instilled, internalized, when primary caregiver has those eyes that after we create what we create in that potty, making us feel special, right? Healthy, infantile narcissism. That's healthy. Okay, so unfortunately, with that, when that doesn't happen or when that's not carried forward, all right, so you come home with that finger painting, and instead of mom putting it up in her office or on the refrigerator, 5 minutes later, after giving it to mom, you look and it's actually in the garbage, right? That's not going to help, right? You don't really get to internalize that feeling of I am good, and you will continue to seek it though. At some point, for most of us, it will occur. Unfortunately, for too high a percentage, it does not. So, as the 5-year-old is constantly searching, that small percentage that never finds it and therefore never gets to internalize, at 25 or 26 is still searching for it. And one of the ways in which, one of the processes in which they can actually continue that search is through those that really define histrionic personality, right? So, more on this condition in terms of the type of clinical vignette you might actually see, whether on a shelf exam, whether at your next party. This is the worst group to actually bring it out in people, because when people have that very generic question, so what's new? Some people are just not prepared for third-year medical student really getting ready for applications to jet set a career that's going to put you in the field that you're in. For the individual who wants it about themselves, you have to absolutely just like overturn the table. Right? So not that you're to blame and you should be lying to people, but be prepared. Be prepared, right? Because when the next question comes up or the next comment comes up that begins with I, red flag should go up. Now, it can be part of a normal conversation, a very routine conversation, but if we see it repeat, and if you begin to get that countertransference of, well, they just asked me the question, and the last 5 minutes have been all about them, you might be actually tapping into something, right? That's the beginning of histrionic personality, right? In terms of you're discovering it. Similarly, if you do it yourself, if you observe somebody else telling a funny joke, only with distress will the individual with histrionic personality laugh at the joke. What can be done is that they can actually tell a joke to one up. Right? They see the entire group laughing. No, I got one. Right? And I can tell you that I've been in situations in which they had to have one. They make it up as they go. And I can tell you how awkward that is. Right? Similarly, you tell them, anything exciting. As you break this wonderful news that you're a soon-to-be physician, and you recount for them this awesome experience you had in your CL clerkship, right? How, it's almost life-changing and you almost want to go into psychiatry now. They may be able to be empathetic in terms of sharing that with you, but I can tell you the vast majority of times empathy is not there. And the opposite actually is, and that's egocentrism. Again, I is the beginning of their sentence. And they could offer you something that clearly is untrue. All right, just one-upping your story to make sure that they have the spotlight. So you actually interact with someone who is semi-conscious after a seizure, waiting for EMS, enacting the 911 and emergency response. Oh yeah, that happened to me the other day. Let me tell you what happened to me, right? Exactly, that's the reaction. That's the countertransference, thank you. Right, that's histrionic personality. Once you understand this, once you really have this image in mind with regard to this cardinal trait, now when you go back and for your final review, you reread those diagnostic criteria, they sink in so easily that you cannot possibly miss them on a psych shelf, right? So all of this to really reinforce how to study for these conditions, right? Questions about histrionic personality?
Are these patients self-aware, or do they have like an urgency where they might be aware kind of like how they're acting, but they just have an urge to continue acting that way?
They could. It really depends on insight. I will tell you, and again, this is obviously going to be a very skewed population, a very biased population. Those that we see in the field, the answer is no. Because if they have the insight that actually allows them to, they're probably not going to come to clinical attention. So it's a very biased sample, but the large part, or the large percentage, the answer is no, they do not have that insight. And will often present to you with anxiety and depression and not make the connection of why they are anxious or depressed, that it's likely what is often referred to as a secondary depression due to a underlying personality variable or a personality disorder. That makes sense?
Yeah, it's stable like throughout context. So if someone's like that, like at a party, but then like at school they're normal, they might just be anxious at the party.
Yes, I think that's a good point.
And so I think that's important to remember too.
That's exactly right.
I think typically it's like pretty low insight. I think typically they come in with like relationship distress, usually like, oh, my partner isn't listening to me, and then you find out that there's like this pattern of communication that's like.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. It's often a sequelae or the result of their personality that it's very difficult to maintain lasting friendships and even intimate relationships for pretty obvious and straightforward reasons. Does this seem to fit Lori? And can you pick out a scene or two in which, again, she's here and she's telling us I'm depressed and we're uncovering this. Now we're going to ask some collateral. Have you seen this before? They're likely to say yes. Can you give a scene or two in this movie that supports what we just said?
That cringe conversation she has with the boyfriend about how like they should get back together and like how could the girlfriend not want to go to Vietnam with him and he was like not a good fit and she's a better fit.
In the middle.
Like even on this, she was like, it's so cringe. I was just like, ugh.
I think even before she even shows up, you can tell that she's gonna have a large personality because everyone knows that, oh, she's this type of, she likes the attention, she's really attractive, she's really seductive, like that's already like set up too.
Right, like the fact that she got invited was like a big issue.
Right.
And then at the end when Mike got knocked down by the other Mike, and then I forgot her name, but her nose starts bleeding.
Oh.
Lori starts screaming because I think the blood got on her, and then she starts ripping off her clothes.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, "This is."
Oh, that's what you were talking
I
about?
think.
Oh,
I don't really
I was
understand
so
why.
confused why she was.
But she like immediately started taking off her dress, and I was like, "This is what's going on."
Yep. Yeah. So I think you might be right. Again, with all of this having been said, none of it is real if we, upon a further investigation, do recognize that everything we just discussed is either A, the direct and physiologic effects of a substance, A prime, due to an underlying medical condition, or B, due to another mental disorder. So in the setting of an active mental disorder, we have to reserve judgment and therefore medical opinion on someone's personality variables or characteristics, right? Because they can definitely be intensified. So if she's clinically depressed, we want to see her response to a biopsychosocial treatment plan focusing on her depression and whether these personality characteristics that we've uncovered also improve. And if the answer is no, they don't, then we then confirm it is due to a personality disorder, and in this case, a cluster B personality disorder. Any other observations about Lori? All right, anybody else here? Oh, somebody brought up the issue that there might be another drug hanging out in the kitchen, and somebody might be dosing their friends. So let's talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, if these characters came into the ED and like told you the story, you would definitely be working them up for substance-induced psychosis. So
Yeah, when you see a group effect like this, now it could happen naturally, right? Ideas, paranoid ideas in particular, can be a contagion, right? And that's a process that we have referred to as shared psychotic disorder. But like any other mental disorder, we do have to investigate and rule out the effects of a substance, which could also easily account for the group dynamic or the group's reaction too. So in this case, ketamine is sitting there in that windowsill for the entirety of this movie. And we have to consider that someone has been putting something in somebody's drink. Now, the reaction to hallucinogens in general is very, very contingent upon how it is provided, right? So if in a therapeutic milieu with a licensed psychiatrist, it could be incredibly beneficial. And that is the emerging field of hallucinogen-assisted psychotherapy, right? So another reason to go into psychiatry. On the other hand, the direct opposite is also true. If you inadvertently have any of this stuff put in your drink as you're at a party, unsuspecting is a form of a date rape drug. It is absolutely terrifying when your reality all of a sudden does not operate with basic physics, right? So perceptual disturbances, the fear of losing one's mind is actually part of the diagnosis of intoxication here, right? And then you have everything in the middle, right? Those are the two extreme poles. So what we might have here is this idea that the world is coming to an end, that there's an Armageddon, largely because not only of the hallucinogen effects, but how that hallucinogen, how the ketamine is provided to these individuals, and that is unsuspecting. Right, so that's something to consider here as well.
And like, would you think after this episode, if we're just going with the plot of the movie and their reality is now like locked in to what's the end, and the main character kind of, she was searching for like a different reality and, kind of got stuck in this other one that she thought would be like the ideal one. If that, let's say if that's all real, would you think that could like lead to like depersonalization, like derealization afterwards for her? Because then her like sense of reality would be off.
Yeah, yeah. I think, and just reflecting on the actual diagnosis itself, this condition, depersonalization, derealization disorder, is when there is evidence of clinically significant depersonalization and/or derealization, one, the other, or both. And I think in the sense of what we see unfold in the plot of this movie, in the plot of Coherence, both are taking place, right? There's a place that there's an alternative reality, that's derealization, and then who are you, what's your identity with regard to the, hundreds or thousands of other yous that are in these tangent universes, these astral planes. So this feeling of depersonalization as well. So she would rule in probably for depersonalization, derealization disorder. Now, again, this is, I always want to make this board relevant. Let's say that's painted in a clinical vignette. What might a question writer add to the final sentence of your vignette where depersonalization, derealization disorder then would not be your single best answer? And in this case, I'm not looking for a substance, and I'm not looking for a medical condition, because I know you already got that.
A previous trauma.
So that I want you to remember that. So that's definitely something I want to keep in the back of our mind, pardon the pun. At this point, I think what you, in reading this question and reading your question carefully, must look out for is any form of amnesia. All right? Because if all of the above is true, but we add amnesia into the equation, what then becomes the single best answer?
Dissociative identity.
Very close. Dissociative amnesia. Right? People who have dissociative amnesia, right? This inability or some significant gap in memory that is not explained by normal forgetfulness, often have feelings of depersonalization and derealization as well. So in this condition, while the presenting complaint may be depersonalization and or derealization, your single best answer is going to be dissociative amnesia, because that is the larger disorder within which aspects of depersonalization and derealization can be explained, right? However, what might you further read, uncover, that will itself result in neither depersonalization, derealization disorder, or choice B, dissociative amnesia being the single best answer?
With DID.
Yeah, yeah. This is where you have to read closely, because if the clinical vignette does include a distinct personality state that takes over the individual's awareness, then DID, and neither dissociative amnesia or depersonalization, derealization disorder is the single best answer, right? There's a hierarchy here. Somebody with DID has a distinct personality state that takes over their awareness, and because of that, is amnestic over the time that they are not, for lack of a better word, conscious. And, I mean, nobody here would be bowled over by the idea that they would also have aspects of depersonalization and derealization. You don't make all three diagnoses, because all three criteria, all three symptoms are explained by DID. So there's a hierarchy that you have to make sure you read the question fully and carefully, right? And I can tell you that depersonalization, derealization disorder is likely to be answer A, dissociative amnesia B, and DID C. Matter of fact, DID is probably going to be D. What do you think will be C? I'm going to get to E in a second, because I know what you're thinking. What if the individual does not have a distinct personality state that takes over their awareness? Has gaps in memory that cannot be explained by ordinary forgetfulness, but now has a travel away from their home and an assumption of a different identity?
Dissociative fugue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, dissociative amnesia with fugue, right? So there's A, B, C, and D for you. Now, if on your shelf they decided to really put one on you, lay one on you, and have a choice E, where they give you all of the above, but let's say DID is not D, right? And you have added aspects of clinically significant irritability, disruption in sleep, difficulty concentrating, and intrusive thoughts. What do those four symptoms then point you to that likely will be choice D in the absence of DID being there? Yes, PTSD. All right. So again, very common, perhaps likely to see on your shelf exam. Questions about dissociative disorders, or in this case, the trauma and related disorders? All right, what else do you want to talk about?
They kind of all have that delusion, I forgot what it's called right now, where you think everyone's an imposter too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, the title of it is reading my mind. But I feel like it's interesting because like, that's part of Mike's whole issue, right? Like he like is afraid an imposter could like replace him, because and then when they find out that they're actually from like 3 different households, or 3 different sets of realities, it becomes quite a battle to figure out who is the original
Right.
people in that home.
Yeah, and the irony here, again, I don't know how much of this is truly intended, but the Capgras syndrome is usually depicted in film through the alien subgenre, right? The body snatcher, right? And this movie, while not really about aliens, could be about aliens because of how everyone gets introduced to this concept through quantum physics and these alternative universes due to the comet. So there's an alien aspect to this movie, but not a true alien invasion as other movies do depict Capgras, right? Capgras is a form of delusional disorder. The Capgras delusion is exactly what you had said. It's the delusional belief that someone has been replaced by an imposter, which clearly gets played here. Now, there's another aspect of delusional disorder here, because the imposter syndrome plays out with this delusional belief that there is a coexistence of me, myself, and perhaps even my universe in a duplicate universe, and that's called reduplicative paramnesia. So that's another delusional disorder or variant of delusional disorder that you have to pay attention to that does come up on exams. Reduplicative paramnesia, right? The delusional belief that oneself or their environment exists in a duplicate universe. Now, if your background is in quantum physics and you don't think this belongs in the DSM, this is not a disorder because you can mathematically prove it, kudos, I totally get that. But if it causes clinically significant distress or impairment, we're really at that point of no return. All right, and again, because we're talking about it, it's probably good to review, in addition to Capgras, the body snatcher syndrome, the imposter syndrome, in addition to reduplicative paramnesia, what are the other two common delusional disorders that often present on psych shelves? Say, go.
Fragoli's on.
Good, Fragoli. What's Fragoli syndrome?
It's like you see someone and you identify them as someone you know, I think. Like
Close,
But
yeah.
they're a stranger, but you identify them as.
It's the belief
Yeah.
that other people are shapeshifters, right?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. Which could lend to that, right?
Okay, gotcha.
Right. So but it's a delusional belief that one can assume the form of another. It's a shapeshifter syndrome. We discussed that in context of the Matrix last week, right? The different agents in the Matrix. And then there's one more condition or one more delusion. Cotard, right? What's Cotard?
Belief that you're dead.
Yeah.
Or you died.
Okay, so maybe The Sixth Sense is not a fictional depiction of Cotard. Maybe it is. I can't give anything away. Back to Coherence. Any final thoughts on this film? Can we talk about ketamine?
Yeah, so could part of the derealization, depersonalization actually be like the dissociative properties of ketamine?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. This is, she's dosing them ketamine. I mean,
She's
there's
had
no
it
way.
before.
There's
There's
no-
mushrooms apparently.
Like all the auditory hallucination.
Yeah, no, the other thing about ketamine, again, this is more, you're not going to see this on a psych shelf, certainly. It's certainly more symbolic, but the reagent now that tests for ketamine is purple, right? So if I know we're not down in the lab, and so we only get the urine drug screen as it comes back. But if when added to the vial turns purple. It's positive for ketamine. So I often look at films that use color symbolism, specifically blue and red, as perhaps being about ketamine. And the fact that those are the two glow sticks that at least the first two universes have makes ketamine an interesting kind of answer here in terms of what really is going on in Coherence. As soon as we log off, I do have something else I want to tell. I won't say this live, but it goes with the color scheme as well. But final thoughts on Coherence? We're good. All right, we'll leave it here.